Predictability is often praised as a virtue. People call it reliable, consistent, stable. But beneath that praise sits a dangerous misunderstanding. Predictability does not protect you, it exposes you. The moment your reactions, routines, and emotional patterns become easy to anticipate, you stop being respected as an autonomous force and start being managed like a system. Here is the uncomfortable truth most people never confront. Control does not begin with force. It begins with anticipation. If someone knows how you will react, they no longer need to overpower you. They simply need to trigger you. Society rewards predictability because predictable people are easier to organize, schedule, market to, motivate, and correct. Schools reward predictable behavior. Jobs reward predictable output. Social groups reward predictable emotional responses. Predictability creates order, and order makes systems efficient. But efficiency for the system is not power for the individual. This is where the confusion begins. People mistake predictability for stability. They believe that if they are consistent enough, clear enough, emotionally transparent enough, they will be trusted and therefore safe. In reality, the opposite happens. The more predictable you become, the more others feel comfortable using you. Not necessarily maliciously, but mechanically. A predictable person is easy to plan around. Think about it carefully. If someone knows you always react emotionally when criticized, they know how to disarm you. If they know you always explain yourself when questioned, they know how to pull information out of you. If they know you always respond quickly, they know you are accessible. If they know you avoid conflict, they know how far they can push. Predictable behavior becomes a map, and maps are not used to admire terrain. They are used to navigating it. This is why control begins with anticipation, not dominance. A manipulator, a manager, a bully, or even a casually selfish person does not need to be powerful. They only need to know what happens next when they press a certain button. Predictability gives them that button. The most dangerous form of predictability is emotional predictability, not routines, not schedules, emotions. When your internal responses are consistent and visible, you become readable. And what is readable can be planned around, exploited, rushed, soothed, pressured, or delayed as needed. This is why people test you early. Testing is not always hostility. Often, it is information gathering. Someone pushes slightly, interrupts lightly, questions casually, or applies a bit of pressure, not to hurt you, but to see what happens. Your response teaches them how to treat you. If you react strongly, they learn your sensitivity. If you explain immediately, they learn you feel accountable. If you comply, they learn entitlement. If you escalate, they learn how to provoke. If you freeze, they learn how to dominate. None of this requires cruelty. It only requires predictability. The false belief that consistency protects you comes from moral thinking, not psychological reality. Morality says, if I behave well, others will behave well. Psychology says, others behave based on what works. What works is what repeats. When your responses repeat, others stop seeing you as an equal agent and start seeing you as a pattern. And patterns are not negotiated with. They are leveraged. This is why predictable people are rarely feared, rarely deferred to, and rarely left alone. Not because they are weak, but because they are accessible. Their inner world is open. Their reactions are known. Their limits are visible. And visibility is vulnerability. True stability is not about behaving the same way in every situation. It is about remaining internally anchored while adapting externally. That is a critical difference most people never learn. An adaptive observer does not abandon values or integrity. They abandon automaticity. They stop reacting on schedule. They stop responding on cue. They stop offering the same emotional output regardless of context. This does not make them chaotic. It makes them unreadable. And unreadability interrupts control at the root. When others cannot anticipate how you will respond, they slow down. They become cautious. They test less aggressively. They gather less certainty. They lose confidence in their leverage. This is the beginning of power reversal. Predictability invites management. Unpredictability invites respect. This is the identity shift that must occur. You move from being a consistent reactor, someone whose behavior is shaped by triggers, to an adaptive observer, someone whose responses are chosen, timed, and withheld as needed. You still feel emotions. You still have principles. You still act decisively, but you no longer do it on demand. This is the difference between being stable for yourself and being predictable for others. One preserves power. The other gives it away. And this leads to the central psychological law of this entire transformation. What can be predicted can be prepared for and controlled. The moment you stop being predictable, control loses its foothold. Before we begin, tap like and hit subscribe. And understand this. Predictability isn't stability. It's access. The moment people can anticipate your reactions, they don't need to overpower you. They only need to trigger you. And once your responses become a pattern, you stop being treated like a person and start being handled like a system. Control rarely begins with intention. It begins with observation. Long before someone consciously decides to manipulate, pressure, or take advantage of you, their nervous system is already collecting data. Humans are pattern recognition machines. We are constantly studying one another, not analytically, but instinctively. Who reacts fast? Who gets emotional? Who backs down? Who explains? Who resists? Who freezes? This learning happens quietly and automatically. Every interaction teaches people something about you. Not what you say about yourself, but how your system responds under mild stress. A raised eyebrow, a delayed reply, a small disagreement. These moments act like probes. They are not attacks. They are tests. And tests exist for one reason: to see what happens next. When your reactions are consistent, people learn quickly. If you always respond immediately, they learn you are available. If you always react emotionally, they learn where to apply pressure. If you always explain yourself, they learn how to extract information. If you always stay polite, they learn how far they can push without consequence. None of this requires malice. It requires repetition. This is why emotional consistency is easier to exploit than chaos. Chaos is unpredictable. Predictability is usable. When reactions follow the same internal script, others don't need to think strategically. They simply press the same button again. Predictable triggers become behavioral shortcuts. Once someone knows how to make you feel guilty, rushed, flattered, defensive, or anxious, they no longer need to negotiate. They bypass reasoning entirely and go straight to reaction. This is the foundation of control. Not persuasion, not dominance. Automation. This is also why manipulators always test first, before committing. They rarely begin with big demands. They start small. A slight overstep, a subtle assumption, a casual pressure, a minor boundary violation. These are diagnostic actions. The response tells them everything they need to know. If you react strongly, they note sensitivity. If you comply, they note access. If you hesitate but comply anyway, they note weak boundaries. If you explain, they note accountability. Each response sharpens the map. By the time manipulation becomes obvious, it has already been rehearsed. The pattern is set. The behavior has been trained. What feels like sudden control is actually a delayed consequence. This is where people misunderstand reliability. Reliability is about follow-through and integrity. Emotional exposure is about predictability of internal reactions. The two are not the same, but they are often confused. You can be reliable without being emotionally readable. You can keep your word without leaking your state. But most people don't. They blend consistency of action with consistency of reaction, and that is where leverage forms. A reliable person keeps commitments. A predictable person reacts on schedule. Control attaches to the second, not the first. The danger is subtle. The more easy to work with you are emotionally, the more others feel entitled to guide, correct, rush, or manage you. Again, not always consciously. Often it feels reasonable to them. After all, the pattern has rewarded them before. This is how people are trained without realizing it. And this is why breaking control is not about confrontation. It's about breaking loops. An affirmation block is necessary here, not as motivation, but as recalibration. You must learn to tolerate the discomfort of not responding the same way, not reacting immediately, not explaining reflexively, not matching emotional tone automatically. The pause is not empty, it is disruptive. And disruption breaks learning. When a predictable response fails to appear, the other person's nervous system stutters. Their shortcut no longer works. They hesitate. They reassess. They lose confidence in their leverage. This is the beginning of power reclamation. Breaking reaction loops does not mean becoming erratic or hostile. It means becoming selective. You still respond, but not reliably, not on cue, not in ways that confirm expectation. Over time, this retrains the environment. People stop assuming. They stop pushing casually. They stop testing without thinking, because the pattern they relied on dissolved. And this leads to the governing psychological law of this stage. Patterns teach others how to move you. When you remove the pattern, you remove the control. Manipulation does not succeed because manipulators are clever. It succeeds because most people are predictable. This is the part few want to accept, because it removes the comfort of blaming the manipulator alone. The real fuel of manipulation is not persuasion, charm, or pressure. It is anticipation. When someone can anticipate how you will respond emotionally, they no longer need to convince you of anything. They simply guide you toward the reaction they already expect. This is why manipulation is rarely loud or dramatic. It is quiet, incremental, and patient. A manipulator watches first. They learn how long it takes you to respond. What makes you feel guilty? What makes you rush? What makes you soften? What makes you over-explain? Once those responses repeat, the work is done. The rest is execution. Guilt, urgency, flattery, and fear only work when the response is reliable. Guilt works because predictable people feel responsible for other people's emotions. Urgency works because predictable people fear delay or disapproval. Flattery works because predictable people crave reassurance. Fear works because predictable people escalate internally before thinking externally. These tools are not magical. They are mechanical. They function because the same emotional button produces the same outcome every time. This is why emotionally predictable people feel safe to exploit. Not safe in a moral sense, safe in a strategic one. The manipulator does not fear retaliation, disruption, or unpredictability. They know what will happen, and certainty breeds boldness. People rarely manipulate those they cannot read, not because they are ethical, but because uncertainty is dangerous. When responses are unclear, pressure becomes risky. The manipulator no longer knows whether guilt will backfire, whether urgency will be ignored, whether flattery will be dismissed, or whether fear will be met with calm. That uncertainty collapses leverage. This is why silence and delayed response disrupt manipulation instantly. Silence removes confirmation. Delay removes urgency. Calm removes fear. When the expected response does not arrive, the manipulator loses momentum. The script breaks. What was supposed to feel smooth suddenly feels exposed. They may escalate, repeat themselves, or become emotional, not because you challenged them, but because the anticipated result failed to appear. This moment is critical. Most people ruin it by rushing to explain themselves. They clarify, they justify, they are reassured, they apologize. And in doing so, they restore predictability. They hand the manipulator their leverage back. Strategic fluidity means resisting that impulse. You are not obligated to respond immediately. You are not obligated to match your emotional tone. You are not obligated to resolve discomfort. Predictability is not integrity. This distinction matters. Integrity is about values, consistency of principles, and alignment between word and action. Predictability is about emotional repetition. You can be principled without being programmable. You can be honest without being readable. You can be reliable without being emotionally exposed. Manipulators rely on the confusion between these two. They frame predictability as being a good person. They frame immediate responses as being respectful. They frame emotional transparency as being honest. But these are social myths, not psychological truths. Real integrity does not require guaranteed reactions. It requires conscious choice, and choice only exists when response is not automatic. This is where the identity transition begins. You move from being readable to being strategically fluid. Strategic fluidity does not mean randomness. It means responsiveness without routine. Your values stay intact. Your emotions still exist. But your outward behavior is no longer predictable under pressure. Sometimes you respond quickly. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you speak. Sometimes you observe. Not to confuse others, but to remove their certainty. This uncertainty forces respect. When people cannot rely on emotional shortcuts, they must engage more carefully. They must think instead of the press. They must ask instead of assume. And many manipulators simply disengage because manipulation is expensive when anticipation fails. This is why the most powerful shift is not confrontation, but disruption. You don't need to accuse. You don't need to explain. You don't need to expose tactics. You only need to stop being guaranteed. Over time, this rewires how others treat you. The rush stops rushing you. The guilt trippers hesitate. The pressure appliers slow down. The manipulators either retreat or reveal themselves. Not because you fought, but because control no longer functioned. This leads to the governing law of this stage. Control thrives where responses are guaranteed. Remove the guarantee, and control collapses on its own. If you're seeing the pattern clearly, tap like and hit subscribe. Because control doesn't start with force, it starts with anticipation. When your emotions respond on schedule, people learn where to press, how to rush you, how to guilt you, how to extract. The most dangerous thing you can be is reliably reactive. The moment predictability ends, something subtle but powerful takes its place. Authority. Not authority that demands attention, raises its voice, or asserts itself verbally, but authority that reorders behavior without confrontation. This is the kind of authority most people never learn to recognize, yet instinctively obey. Unpredictability forces caution. When people can no longer anticipate your reactions, their nervous systems slow down. They pause. They choose words more carefully. They hesitate before pushing, asking, interrupting, or assuming. This hesitation is not fear. It is respect born from uncertainty. The human brain treats uncertainty as potential risk, and risk triggers restraint. This is why people naturally slow down around those they can't read. Predictable individuals invite speed. Others rush them, pressure them, multitask around them, interrupt them, or escalate emotionally, because the outcome feels safe and familiar. Unpredictable individuals do the opposite. They make speed feel dangerous. When responses are not guaranteed, the interaction demands attention. Attention is the first marker of authority. People begin to listen more closely. They check themselves before speaking. They watch for cues that never come. This shifts the emotional center of gravity away from the other person and toward you, without you doing anything outwardly dominant. Testing stops when patterns disappear. Testing only works when it produces data. When a test is met with silence, delay, neutrality, or an unexpected response, the test fails. And failed tests are rarely repeated, not because the tester has learned a moral lesson, but because the effort no longer yields information. When someone cannot learn how to move you, they stop trying. This is the invisible line where hierarchy locks in. People don't say, "I respect this person now." They simply adjust. Tone changes. Questions become more measured. Requests become more polite. Challenges soften or vanish entirely. All of this happens beneath conscious intention. It's important to understand the distinction here. Emotional variability is not emotional chaos. Chaos is erratic. It signals instability. It makes people nervous in the wrong way. Emotional chaos destroys authority because it creates unpredictability without grounding. People don't slow down. They withdraw, dominate, or disengage. Calm unpredictability is the opposite. It means your emotional baseline is stable, but your outward responses are not scripted. You don't lash out. You don't overreact. You don't swing wildly. You simply don't give the same response every time pressure appears. Sometimes you respond immediately. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you speak plainly. Sometimes you say nothing. But underneath it all, you remain centered. This combination, internal stability with external unpredictability, is what establishes hierarchy. Why? Because others must adapt to you. Hierarchy always flows toward the person who adapts less. The more someone has to adjust their tone, timing, and behavior around you, the more authority you hold in the interaction. And unpredictability forces adjustment. It removes the ability to dominate by routine. This is why calm unpredictability feels heavy. People feel it even if they can't explain it. They describe it as presence, confidence, or gravitas. But what they're responding to is the absence of leverage. There is nothing obvious to grab onto. No emotional hook. No reliable trigger. No script. So they proceed carefully. This carefulness is often mistaken for intimidation. It's not. It's deference. Deference emerges when the nervous system senses that the cost of miscalculation is unknown, and unknown costs produce restraint. Integration is crucial here. Unpredictability must be paired with integrity, or it collapses into confusion. You are not changing values. You are changing access. You are not playing games. You are removing guarantees. You remain fair. You remain calm. You remain consistent in principles, but you are no longer mechanically responsive. This is flexibility without instability. You are not reacting to manage the room. You are letting the room manage itself around you. And over time, this rewires social dynamics completely. People begin to self-correct before crossing lines. They ask instead of assume. They wait instead of push. They think instead of the press, all because the familiar pattern no longer exists. This is the quiet reversal of power. No confrontation, no explanation, no assertion, just the removal of predictability. And the governing psychological law becomes undeniable. Uncertainty forces deference. When people cannot anticipate you, they treat you with care. At the final stage of this transformation, the goal is no longer to appear unpredictable. It is to become centered. This distinction matters more than anything else you've learned so far. Predictability was never the real problem. The problem was reactivity. And once reactivity disappears, control has nowhere to attach. This is the psychological shift that locks everything in permanently. You move from being consistent in your reactions to being consistent in your center. Most people misunderstand consistency. They think it means behaving the same way in every situation, responding quickly, being emotionally transparent, and maintaining a stable personality others can rely on. But that kind of consistency is external. It is visible, and what is visible can be anticipated. Centered people are different. They are consistent internally, not externally. Their values do not change. Their emotional baseline does not swing wildly. But their outward responses are not guaranteed. They are chosen, timed, withheld when necessary. This is why they become impossible to control. Control requires access. Access requires anticipation. Anticipation requires patterns. Once patterns disappear, control collapses. When you recap the predictability-based power laws, they all point to this single truth. Predictability exposes leverage. Patterns train others how to move you. Guaranteed responses invite pressure. Uncertainty forces respect. But none of these laws work if you are merely performing unpredictability. That is still a reaction, just in disguise. True power comes when your nervous system no longer feels compelled to discharge emotion on cue. This is what uncontrollable people share. They do not rush to respond. They do not explain reflexively. They do not soothe others' discomfort automatically. They do not escalate when challenged. Instead, they pause. That pause is not hesitation. It is containment. Watch how uncontrollable people move. Their movements are economical. No excess, no fidgeting, no urgency leaking through posture. Their pace is steady, not slow, deliberate, not rigid. They are not performing calmly. They are calm because nothing inside them is demanding immediate expression. They pause before speaking, not to calculate manipulation, but because speech is no longer a pressure valve. Words are tools now, not reflexes. When they speak, it is precise. When they don't, it is intentional. Silence is not absence. It is presence without exposure. This is why predictability is replaced by presence, timing, and restraint. Presence means you are fully there without trying to be seen. Timing means you act when advantage exists, not when pressure demands it. Restraint means you do not leak information unnecessarily. Together, these make anticipation impossible. People cannot rush you if you do not respond to urgency. They cannot guilt you if you do not react emotionally. They cannot flatter you if you do not seek reassurance. They cannot intimidate you if escalation does not move you. Control fails where access ends. and access ends the moment your internal state becomes private. This is not emotional suppression. Suppression is denial. Suppression creates tension and eventual explosion. Centered restraint is different. You still feel emotions, deeply, but they are processed internally, not broadcast externally. You decide what leaves your system and what stays contained. That decision is power. Over time, something remarkable happens. People stop trying, not consciously, subconsciously. They stop rushing you. They stop pushing boundaries casually. They stop testing reactions. They stop assuming compliance. Why? Because every attempt costs more effort than it returns. Manipulators rely on efficiency. So does control. When leverage disappears, control becomes expensive, and expensive strategies are abandoned. This is why uncontrollable people are rarely targeted, rarely dominated, and rarely pressured, even when they hold no formal authority. Their authority is structural. It exists at the level of interaction, not position. This is the dark psychology protocol lock-in. You are no longer trying to manage how others see you. You are no longer calibrating reactions for approval. You are no longer concerned with being understood immediately. You are grounded, and grounding removes handles. If this helped you understand why predictability makes you manageable, tap like and hit subscribe. And lock this in. I stay consistent in my center, not my reactions. Because the law is permanent. What can be predicted can be prepared for and controlled. Remove the pattern and leverage dies.